first want to thank you all very much for inviting us to be part of your service in this beautiful sanctuary. And I think because I'll be speaking about the unhoused population, that word sanctuary kind of sticks in my throat a little bit, because this is a beautiful sanctuary. And when we don't have sanctuary, just imagine that feeling. No sanctuary. So, I don't want to spend much time on why I wound up in relationship with the unhoused community of Portland, Maine, other than to say that I was no longer willing to step over them or willfully ignore them as I traipsed around photographing at first light on the Portland waterfront. So to be clear, I'm not a policymaker. I'm not an advocate or social worker, nor am I affiliated with any formal organization related to what we refer to as the homeless. I'm a free-range artist and chaplain. But instead of patently ignoring the homeless man holding his sign outside the coffee shop, I took the risk. I introduced myself, and I offered him a coffee and a cigarette to calm his jangled nerves. This was Mikey, who I would come to find out was chronically unhoused, with a past I am most certain I would not survive. After many days and many cups of coffee, I asked bluntly, what might help, Mikey? What might help? And he said, well, dry socks would really help. And coffee is really good. But he said, would you go on your computer, which was his code word for social media, would you go on the computer and share some of these stories? This initiated a project on Facebook titled Dear Anonymous, and featured portraits and stories, all with permission, of the unhoused individuals. With a lot of help from very generous supporters, we were able to supply new socks, dignified clothing, warm blankets, over $30,000 of coffee gift cards, basic first aid supplies, and food. There was no nonprofit, no governing board, and 100% of everything was delivered to people directly, face to face on the street. What an angel you are, I heard from the housed and the unhoused. I don't like that I live in a world where by offering a pair of wool socks to someone in my community at complete risk of frostbite makes me eligible for angel status. I don't like living in a world where the homeless have been reduced to a problem to be eliminated. It's much more complicated than that, and sadly, I think we really struggle with complexity. If I can make only one thing clear today, it would be this. I didn't meet the homeless population. I met Mikey, and I met Joe Blaze, who told me stories that curled my hair. I met Dr. Beak and Grizz, Crooked Taylor and Teardrop. I met CJ and Grey Wolf, who asked me to read his letters from his mom. I met the Wizard as he dashed down the street, cape blowing out behind him. I met Renee and Rose and Sweetheart Romeo, Broken Eddie, Benzo Benny, and Blue Eyes. I met Sweet Ronnie and Soulless Chandler and Alan and Josh and James and Joy. I met Biggie and Bonnie. I met the Sock Man and the Rose Man. I met Cadillac Jack, who trained racehorses in Florida, and Handsome Bob, who is an incredibly talented artist. I met Chris, the reader, who has read more books on the street than anyone I know, and I had trouble locating new material for him. I met a man, formerly a scholar of Russian literature, who handed me on the street in the middle of a snowstorm a tattered and dog-eared copy of The Plague by Albert Camus. They are all unhoused, all unique, nuanced, and as impossible to truly know as each one of us. There were 45 deaths of the unhoused just last year in Portland, Maine. 45. And as I count the congregation today, I think we're just over 45. So that gives you a good visual understanding of the people who died on the streets of Portland, Maine last year. 8 of the people I mentioned by name died in the last 3 years. Mikey, remember Mikey? Carries what he calls the death deck. The death deck. It's his collection of memorial cards for each person who dies on the street, because that's his chosen family. So that, in his words, at least someone will remember them. My camera, I'm a photographer, my camera became a conduit, a profound portal to these intimate relationships lasting maybe 1/500th of a second or less. That's the time it takes for a shutter to open and close. And I was irrevocably moved by what was shared with me and what I was gifted to see. So what did I see? I saw the face of unresolved trauma. I saw the abused. I saw abusers. I saw tenderness and vulnerability, desperation, paranoia, and joy. I saw filth, and I saw beauty. I saw deep, unbridled, chronic heartache. I found delusion, and I found insight. I found unbelievable levels of resiliency, and I found humor. I found illness and rage, and I saw grief stewing and suffering marinating. I saw hopelessness, shame, and fear, and I saw love. So we would meet at the corner of Commercial Street and Moulton at 5 a.m., and we'd distribute whatever resources we had. And as we departed, I love yous echoed off the brick facades adjacent to the harbor. Quite an uncanny experience. Love you, Mikey. Love you, Ma. Love you, Taylor. Love you, Grizz. Love you, guys. Love you. Love you. There were more declarations of love on that street corner as we dispersed than I've heard spoken at any family event, mine or others. And as Mikey, now known as Uncle Mikey, said under his breath to me, "Best we say I love you now, Ma. No guarantee any of us will be here tomorrow." And he was right. So, what is the truth about the unhoused? I have no idea. But here's the truth as I experienced it that I'd like to share in 3 brief vignettes. He was badly wounded. His black eye was swollen beyond its socket, mottled with purple and red. Multiple unbandaged stitches ran across his grimy brow, and he's seated on a low window ledge, kind of bent over in half with his face near his knees, arms curled in. The very image of dejection. He tells me he was beat with a chain, phone stolen, money too, and he was left to bleed. Someone somewhere called 911. What I know to be true is the eagerness with which he accepts the blueberry coffee cake we offer him, and he eats it immediately, ravenously, leaving buttery crumbs in his unkempt beard that we will later help him brush away. He lingers and uncharacteristically reaches for a hug, as do I, and I am no hugger. I don't know how all that had happened to him. The only truth I know is that ferocious love he offered. I quietly approach him. He is rail thin and folded like origami paper beneath a heating vent outside a restaurant. It's really cold, and it's dark, and frankly, I'm not sure he's alive. So as not to startle him, if he is, I gently wrap a blanket over his shoulders and over his head, and I'm really grateful to see that he's reaching with his hands to grasp the edges. So I leave food, I leave socks, I leave a coffee card, and I walk away thinking this could be my son, this could be my nephew, this could be my grandson, or yours. The falling snow dampens sounds out on the bricks, but I hear a muffled but distinct thank you. I did not need that thank you. I wish I could have saved him the effort. Still, the feeling surpassed any Christmas morning memory of my life. His gift of ferocious love. My hands are in great pain from the bitter cold, and I can't manage to hand out any more socks from the back of my car. Me, who, unlike anyone surrounding me, slept in a warm house, behind a locked door, under dry blankets. I have to stop because the pain is unbearable. Well, the burly, disheveled man in front of me gently takes my hands and cradles them in his. His hands, two huge mitts of swollen, warm flesh. He understands. A woman, unhoused, next to him, retrieves a battered hand warmer from her pocket and stuffs it into mine. And I stutter, "This is amazing," as the pain starts to soften a little bit. She responds, "Isn't it?" with a sublime smile I've never seen cross her typically worried and anxious face. That was Renee Kenny. She gestures, cupping her hands in front of her like a Madonna, and says, "It's divine." And I think, I cannot possibly accept or deserve this love. That was the feeling. I don't deserve this kind of love. And I realize she shared that same sentiment with me previously. So in that moment, it is a radical act of acceptance of their profound generosity and their ferocious love. I recognize in moments like these over and over. I would be a total blithering idiot on the streets in less than 24 hours. Between the relentless cold, the inability to have safe space, and no sleep. If I didn't drink, I might start to ease the pain. If I didn't do drugs, I might begin in order to survive the suffering and indignity of the bricks. So I'd like to share today some of the gifts of wisdom from my unhoused friends. You never, ever know someone's story. We simply cannot assume we know. There are people on the streets because they drink and do drugs. There are people who drink and do drugs to cope with the bestiality of the streets. There are people on the streets who never drink or do drugs. There is a massive and threatening undertow of untreated mental illness. So being unhoused is only one quality. It's not the whole story. And as Mikey says, Ma, there are good people here on the streets, on hard times, with good hearts, struggling. Yes, there are liars, cheaters, and thieves. There's always a hustle to survive. But that is not the sole propriety of the streets or the unhoused. Please don't give with conditions, as in, I'll give you this, but, or, I'll give you this if. So that's not giving, that's making a deal. And we should be really clear which one we're offering and match that with how difficult, how profoundly difficult it is to accept help. Donations to the street become part of the currency of the street. And that's the business of the street and not ours. The divine resides in the repugnant, sordid, the profane, the deranged, the incomprehensible, and the unreasonable, as much as it shows up in the elegant and refined. And what I might consider chaotic and overly dramatic might be what getting someone's life together looks like early on in the trajectory of their journey. The term, there but for the grace of God go I, that's a term we use frequently, I think. There but for the grace of God go I is defined as talking about someone in a bad situation, and meaning you're lucky not to be in the same situation. So I want to point out that sometimes luck is the only difference. Luck, not great wisdom or great intellect. And we need to be careful. We may be overlooking the hidden graces of their journey, because who knows what the grace of God looks like in someone's life. There's no magic in being housed. I wish. An unhoused person can sometimes experience profound isolation upon being housed. They are essentially removed from their street community. It can amplify mental health issues. It can apply enormous stress to remain housed when they are not healed enough or sound enough yet to cope with all that requires. So, becoming housed is a process, and often a process of working through, around, and in trauma. And it requires support. Becoming housed requires support. As humans, many might agree, we struggle with the notion of our purpose. What is our purpose? And as Uncle Mikey stated, you know, out here on the street, Ma, we're mostly lonely and depressed, and there's no purpose. Many an addict has described to me the relative ease of taking the needle out of their arm, which is shorthand for recovering from heroin addiction. It's easier to take the needle out of their arm compared to being sober and having to find purpose, a reason to go on. When in active addiction, obtaining the drug provides some of that purpose. How ironic. Without it, there can be a crisis of purpose. Just let that sit for a minute. There's a crisis of purpose. This next one is very brief and might hit a little hard. When it comes to addiction, drug use is pain relief. It's not a party. And one more. I once sat with Mikey and his wife on Commercial Street. I think it was July or August. It was very busy, crowded. lots of tourists. And as soon as I sat with them, I became more than invisible. More invisible than just the invisibility of an older woman in our culture. I felt shunned. That's the intentional avoidance of everyone. Not a passive lack of eye contact, but intentional refusal to connect. People pulled their leashed dogs away from us, lest we touch them. For a couple of hours I sat, and I felt the pain of this. I felt my companion's frustration and anger grow. And I imagine what that is like day after day after day. And then to have a cop come along and say, literally, move along. There are people coming through. As if you are not people. The weight of shunning is real and damaging. And finally, what do we do when love shows up with vomit in its beard and bugs crawling from its pant leg? What do we do when love shows up spitting at our feet with open sores on its arms? I don't have the answers, but I really sit with that question. Like John Holt says, the true test of intelligence is not how much we know how to do, but how we behave when we don't know what to do. Love is easy to love when it's clean, wears deodorant. Maybe it's like was said to me on the streets one day. We just bring all the little broken pieces and show up and hope it will be enough. To show up in a space we are not is a radical act of love if we remain in the mystery, the uncertainty, in the pain, with no romance of fixing anything, but to learn and not condemn, to adjust our camera lens on humanity and not problems. It takes a ferocity to love what we find unlovable, to land ourselves square in the quagmire of unreasonable, ferocious love. And I don't recommend anything other than to begin in our own hearts, to examine what lens we see through, and to remember that beyond solution, there is connection. And connection will inform decisions. Thank you.